Senate will please come to order. Good morning. Today for devotionals, we will have a moment of silence. Thank you. We normally would do pages at this time, but they're also being done in the House, so we'll probably be doing that at a different moment of announcements, whichever one that is opportune for. So now we are in announcements. Are there any announcements, Senator from Washington?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that S94 be ordered to lie. Everything that the Senate Finance Committee has had a chance to work on this one was voted out yesterday in miscellaneous tax, and rather than just have it showing up on the calendar, I ask that it be ordered to lie.
Without objection, they do it. Now the senator from Washington has moved that S94, appearing for action on today's calendar, be ordered to lie. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered S94 to lie. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules be suspended, in particular temporary Rule 44A, and that when H517, an act relating to approval of the dissolution of Duxbury-Moortown Fire District, number 1, is read and referred, it be referred to its committee of jurisdiction and not be referred to the Committee on Rules.
Now the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the rules be suspended, in particular Rule 44A, and that when H517, an act relating to approval of the dissolution of the Duxbury-Moortown Fire District number 1 is read and referred, it be referred to its committee of jurisdiction and not be referred to the Committee on Rules. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you've suspended your rules to take that action. We now have I believe, a constitutional proposal to introduce. Please listen to the reading of the purpose of the constitutional proposal.
Proposal 4, Section 1, Purpose. A. This proposal would amend the Constitution of the State of Vermont to specify that the government must not deny equal treatment and respect under the law on account of a person's race, ethnicity, sex, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, or national origin. The Constitution is our founding legal document stating the overarching values of our society. This amendment is in keeping with the values espoused by the current Vermont Constitution. Chapter 1, Article 1 declares, quote, that all persons are born equally free and independent and have certain natural, inherent, and unalienable rights, end quote. Chapter 1, Article 7 states, quote, that government is, or ought to be, instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, end quote. The core value reflected in Article 7 is that all people should be afforded all the benefits and protections bestowed by the government, and that the government should not confer special advantages upon the privileged. This amendment would expand upon the principles of equality and liberty by ensuring that the government does not create or perpetuate the legal, social, or economic inferiority of any class of people. This proposed constitutional amendment is not intended to limit the scope of rights and protections afforded by any other provisions in the Vermont Constitution. B. Providing for the equality of rights as a fundamental principle in the Constitution would serve as a foundation for protecting the rights and dignity of historically marginalized populations and addressing existing inequalities. This amendment would reassert the broad principles of personal liberty and equality reflected in the Constitution of the State of Vermont with authoritative force, longevity, and symbolic importance.
I've heard the reading of the purpose of Proposition 4, and it will be referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We now have 2 Senate bills for introduction. The first is introduced by Senator Vyhovsky and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-156, an act relating to education and corrections infrastructure in the state.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Institutions. We now have S-157, introduced by Senator Hashim. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
S-157, an act relating to harassment, hazing, and bullying prevention in schools.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Education. We have now one House bill for reference. It is introduced by Representative Torrey and others. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-517, an act relating to the approval of the dissolution of the Duxbury-Moortown Fire District Number 1.
Now you've heard the reading of the bill. It is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. That brings us to the orders of the day.
Sorry. I wanted to do the appointments, but I can do them at the end on the announcements.
My apologies, I was not made aware of that. Sorry. We have up for consideration H-429. 429 was read the first time and referred to the Committee on Government Operations, which recommends that when the bill be amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which also reports that the bill ought to pass when amended. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
H-429, an act relating to miscellaneous changes to election laws.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Government Operations, the Senator from Addison, Senator Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, everyone. Gorgeous day out there, and we are here for what I hope is our last day of this session. H-429 is a miscellaneous elections bill and includes a lot of provisions that will make our elections more fair, more transparent, and more efficient to administer, and it will provide important access to voting for some very, very specific voters who have a hard time voting in Vermont. It will also implement a very important electoral reform initiative. This bill includes the entire elections package that your Senate Government Operations Committee has worked very hard on during this session. You can find the bill starting on page 3248 of today's calendar. I'm going to go through some of the provisions of the bill so you understand them, and then I can take you through where they appear in the bill. The first thing that the bill does is that it includes a provision regarding candidate financial disclosures. As I know we're all aware in this room, when a candidate files for their petition to run for office, we are required under current law to file a financial disclosure provision. That financial disclosure provision, if a candidate fails to file it, there are no sort of penalties involved right now. Well, the Ethics Commission came to us and requested that we both expand the scope and that we provide some kind of accountability for putting that into place. So it expands the scope to not only now include both state people running for state office, but also for county office. So the 5 county people who run are sheriffs, state's attorneys, assistant judges, probate judges, and high bailiffs. So they would also have to file that candidate disclosure form. And if any candidate did not file that form, there would be could be imposed a $10 per day fine for not doing so. With the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission would also have the ability to waive that fine, and it would not be able to be more than $1,000 in total. The Ethics Commission, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of State's office would work together on the procedure for that penalty. So that's the first provision. The second provision is for secure, limited electronic ballot return. And I know that many of us have heard a lot on this issue, so I want to make sure that everybody understands what this does. It permits electronic ballot return through a secure portal. And in the Senate version of the bill, it's for a narrowly defined group of Vermont voters. People with disabilities, and people who are overseas only those 2 groups of voters. People who are Vermont voters living overseas, that could be for military purposes. In fact, most of them are people in our military who have been deployed overseas, or people who are living overseas for educational purposes, for other service purposes. Those two groups would be able to return their ballot electronically. I want you to understand that right now, federal law requires states to deliver ballots to voters under the Military and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act of 2009. Federal law requires the delivery of electronic ballots for all voters who fall under the Uniform Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act, or what's known as UACAVA. Those are already electronically delivered. This would allow a subset of that group to return their ballots electronically. For those of you who've logged on to the My Voter page on the Secretary of State's office, that is the access to the portal that is used for electronic delivery and would be used for electronic return. Right now, voters who get their ballots delivered electronically have to press a button and have them printed out and then mailed back. This would allow for overseas voters and disabled voters to return them electronically. We heard really compelling testimony from people, particularly blind voters, that this would benefit because they would be able to vote on their own using the assisted technology that they have at their computers to vote on their own and return their ballot electronically. Right now, they have to have assistance because most people who are blind don't have a printer. And they have to have assistance to print their ballot and take it to a mailing place, but this would allow them to do it on their own. And there are other categories of disabled people who would be able to do so as well as people who are overseas, people who are deployed on a submarine and don't have access to the mail services. They could return their ballots electronically through this. And it's the same portal that we already use for delivery of ballots. 31 states in the country already have electronic ballot return, 31 states. So we are in the minority by not allowing any of our voters to return their ballots electronically. And most states do not use a secure portal, that is being proposed here. Most states have people fax their ballots back, attach them to an email and send them back in a much less secure way than a secure electronic portal. And we have in our Secretary of State's office, our Director of Election has served on national committees that is looking into voter security. Our former Secretary of State also worked on this issue. They recommend this only because they think we are now at the point where the technology is good enough that this could be a secure system for returning electronic ballots for these limited group of voters who have a really hard time voting right now and often do not get their ballots back in time. All right, the next provision, and I'm happy to answer more questions on that because I know it's been an issue that's come up a lot. The next provision is about candidate demographic data collection. This includes the collection of optional candidate demographic information when candidates file to run for state, county, or local office. When we fill out the forms that say we're going to run for office, or anyone does, it would include questions about candidate demographics. That information would be stored at the Secretaries of State office for county and state elections, and at the local office in our local clerk's office for local offices. It would be exempt from Public Records Act, so somebody couldn't specifically ask for an individual person, I want to see their demographic form. It would also, couldn't say I want to see the forms for all female candidates. And this is to prevent people who are bad actors trying to get information on candidate demographics for the purposes of harassing them or finding out where they live. So that would be exempt from the Public Records Act, but having the Secretary of State would be able to, in aggregate form, release the data saying this is the percentage of candidates who are, identify as Black or identify as transgender or whatever, so that people in our state will be able to understand the demographics of people who are running for office on a statewide basis, at local and state elections, and understand if it's a good reflection of the demographics of our state. It's a way, like we do with many other policy areas, of trying to get better data so that we can ensure that people have better access to running for office. The next provision is about write-in candidate notifications and thresholds, and this requires notification by the second Friday prior to an election for anyone who plans to run as a write-in candidate in federal, state, or county elections, not local elections, in order for that write-in candidate's vote to be individually counted by name, rather than collectively counted in the aggregate. Right now, our clerks have to count every single write-in ballot. So we all know that every election people think they're being funny and they write in Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or, some silly name or Abraham Lincoln. And right now, our clerks have to literally count how many votes Mickey Mouse gets and report that through the election system. This would say, unless you have registered as a write-in candidate 10 days prior to the election, the second Friday prior to the election, the clerks don't have to individually count. It does not prevent somebody from running as a write-in candidate. As we all know, we have to put in our petitions in May. The primary is in August. Independent candidates are in late August. So there is plenty of time prior to the primary and prior to the general election for people to know that there's an opening or that there's a possibility that they might want to run as a write-in candidate in order to notify their clerks. This saves our clerks a lot of time. This is a provision that our clerks really, really want to see get into law. It would not apply to municipal elections. There was a lot of concern, particularly in the other body, and your Senate Government Operations Committee agreed that for local elections, a lot of times, there's first of all not as much time, and second of all, those elections have lower turnout. So you really could have somebody say, hey, I want to run for school board, I didn't make it onto the ballot, I want to be a write-in candidate, and it could be, outside the polls, somebody decides to be a write-in candidate, and that would not be prevented with this. So we want to be clear that it's not for local elections. But for the state and county and federal elections, it would apply. It also increases the threshold for write-in candidates to win a primary to the greater of 10% of votes cast or the number of signatures required to run. Except for that if a write-in candidate receives more votes than a candidate whose name is printed on the ballot, that candidate would win. And this is just to make sure that a write-in candidate, especially if there's nobody running in an election, is getting a sufficient number of votes to be a real candidate. So they have to get at least the amount that the petition signatures require, or 10% of the vote. And that, as the elections numbers of petition signatures increase, the 10% increases, obviously, because that's how math works. The next provision, Mr. President, is called the sore loser law. And that law is something that 46 other states have. 46. We are one of only 4 states that does not have this provision. And this prohibits a candidate who loses a major party primary election from running in the general election as another party's candidate or as an independent candidate. So this provision, prohibition is what is commonly referred to by legal scholars and by political scientists as the sore loser law. That's the name that is used for this provision. 46 other states have it, and it maintains the integrity of the nomination and primary process and encourages candidate transparency. It encourages you to say, if you're a member of a major party, and as we all know, there are 3 major parties in this state, you run in the primary that is the one that is most associated with the party you identify with. And if you lose, you don't get to switch parties and run as another party, or you don't get to decide you're going to be an independent candidate. You get one bite at the apple. It maintains the integrity of the nomination and primary election process. It encourages candidate transparency, and it prevents voter confusion. because voters are wondering, why are you one party one time and another party another time? And as I said before, nearly all states have some form of this law. The next provision is about campaign finance limits for statewide candidates only. And it permits candidates for statewide election to contribute up to $20,000 for a political party in an election cycle. Current law permits $10,000 from any single source. And the Senate Government Operations significantly lowered this from the amount the House permitted. As this bill was introduced, the amount was at $100,000. It came down to $20,000, or it came down to $60,000 as it moved over to the Senate. We took it down to $20,000. I want to emphasize this is only for statewide candidates. It applies to all three parties. And it is in large part because statewide elections have become more expensive, and it has become more difficult for parties to support statewide candidates. And so the $20,000 just increases it for those literally 6 candidates, 6 offices only, the statewide. Federal candidates go under federal election campaign finance laws, and they have an unlimited amount that they can give to their party. But this is for the 6 statewide candidates that for state office. The next is about biennial town and county committee reorganization reporting, and it requires that biennial committee reorganizations include the town and county level political committee members in their reporting. So we all know parties are reorganizing this year. They do so every 2 years, and this would just require them to submit the names of the people who are on their committees. It's especially important right before a presidential election when presidential delegates would be chosen from these county and town committees. The last provision in the bill is the ranked choice voting provisions that we passed in S32. And the provisions in the bill are slightly different, just slightly different than the S32 that left this chamber. And includes some language that the House Government Operations Committee was working on. The House Government Operations Committee felt uncomfortable with the ability for a town, a legislative body, the select board or the city council, for making the decision about whether to switch to ranked choice voting. So they wanted it to be just the vote of the voters at a special meeting or a town meeting to switch from the winner-take-all system to ranked choice voting. This is consistent with what's in current law for switching from a voice vote to a Australian ballot vote. So we felt like that was a reasonable change. There are also some provisions that would not allow hand count towns to do ranked choice voting. There are about 100 hand count towns until the Secretary of State's office was able to work through some of the challenges of doing ranked choice voting with hand count towns. So those 2 provisions are included in the S32 or ranked choice voting provisions in this bill. And there are a couple other technical changes and a date change, but otherwise it's mostly the package that left this chamber for ranked choice voting. And your Senate Government Operations Committee worked really hard to come to a compromise package on this. There are things in this bill that are really important to lots of different stakeholders. And we tried to create a package of elections reform that would benefit and meet the needs of a variety of stakeholders. And it was not an easy thing for us to do. And I'm proud that our committee made it through and has brought this bill to the floor to you today on the last day of the session. I just want to say that the committee voted on a vote of 4-0 to advance this package. We heard from a number of witnesses, including obviously our Secretary of State's office and a number of people in Secretary of State's office, the Clerks Association, of course, many voting rights advocates from various organizations, of course, our Legislative Council, the reporter in the House. We heard from some members of the press. We heard from Middlebury College political science professor. We heard from the executive directors of all 3 major parties. We heard from, of course, the VPIRG. We heard from the League of Women Voters. from several disability rights groups, including the Vermont Legal Aid Disability Law Project and the National Federation of the Blind. We heard from, again, the Municipal Clerk's Office and their lobbyist in the building. We heard from the Ethics Commission regarding the provision. We heard from several members of the public, and we heard from the Chief Technology Officer from the company that runs the portal that the Secretary of State's office administers, but is run by a vendor or an administrator. So, Mr. President, we are proud of this package, and we urge the body to support the complete package, and I am happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Bill was then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which considered the same for the report of the Committee on Appropriations, Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations reviewed the bill for appropriations. There is just a de minimis. We get one more chance to use that. Some per diems for the implementation, the study committee that's going to be happening to look at ranked choice voting, how that would happen in the future. There's per diems in there. So with that, the committee voted favorably on the bill, voted out favorably on a vote of 7-0-0.
I've heard the report of the Committee on Appropriations. The question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? If so, Senator from Chittenden North.
I want to speak to the actual bill itself. Is this the?
This is the amendment that's being offered. It's a strike all amendment. Okay. So it's the strike all amendment to the bill. So you can speak to the combination of both.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the amendment?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as a reporter of the amendment.
Thank you. My first question has to do with the way the report was delivered. I had a little bit of trouble following in this booklet because the sore loser provision, which is section 1, was addressed by the reporter fourth in line of all these other clauses. So I just wondered if there was a logic to that.
No, Mr. President, I delivered the report based on the way that I wrote it up the other night, just because that was how my brain ordered things. So I can go through the sections of the bill in order if that would be helpful.
With respect to that first sore loser provision, which I think is unfortunately named, it reminds me of picky eaters and nosy neighbors, but that aside, in order to understand why a particular candidate might be encouraged to run in one party's primary and to be nominated for another party, did the committee take testimony from anyone who has lost a primary and then run in a general election?
We did not take testimony from individual candidates. No, and this provision was a provision that was put in the bill on the House side, and so they may have done this, done testimony like that. This provision is consistent with state law in 46 other states, so it is not a unique provision, and so we didn't feel like added testimony was necessary.
Did the committee discuss how many times and how frequently such a double bite of the apple, as it were, has happened?
No, we did not.
Is it only independents or progressives that are prone to such canny candidacies, or are there other instances where someone lost a primary and then ran in the general election?
This provision is party neutral. There are 3 major parties, and this would apply to the same provision to all 3 of the major parties. It is under current law, a candidate may only run in one primary. They have to choose the party that they run in that primary under, and a candidate can choose which party they most identify with and run in that primary. So it applies equally to all 3 major parties.
I believe I just heard it said that other states have done this, as in instituting a sore loser law. However, Vermont is unique. Historically, our state has had a robust history of having both a significant number of independents as well as the most established third party. Did the committee take testimony as to how an enactment of a sore loser law in Vermont would affect the ability for Vermont voters to have a wide range of choices that we enjoy today if this were to pass?
The committee took testimony from the three major parties. The committee took testimony from members of the public, from voters' rights group. This was a provision that we had in state law, and prior to this, we were a state that had a sore loser law, and it's important to understand that there are different ways of implementing it. One way is to align the independent candidate deadline with the party candidate deadline, so that you have to choose immediately which you're going to do, and choose whether to run as an independent or a major party candidate at the same time. We have separate deadlines for independent candidates and for party candidates for the primary. Independent candidate deadline is after the party candidate primary. So there are different ways of implementing this. Different states take a different approach, but this was the language that came to us from the House, and it stayed in, and we did take testimony from a variety of people across the political spectrum.
Speaking of the House, this bill passed with only single party support, with many Democrats voting against and others supporting it only after a significant amount of pressure from Democratic leadership. In other states, we see parties with supermajorities or parties with majority control of both chambers and the governor's office able to pass election laws without bipartisan support. And I would hate for us to do this now. Such laws in other states are generally made to reduce voter choices and voices, as well as to concentrate power. In order to help voters feel the process here is being changed for their sake and to widen choice, wouldn't it be better to adjust Vermont laws with at least bipartisan support or the votes of independents?
I think that's a political question. It's not about the substance of the bill. I think it's always wonderful when we have a unanimous vote in this chamber, and I hope that the body will unanimously support this.
I thank the President, and I thank the Senator.
Mr. President,
Senator from Chittenden Central.
if I might just comment briefly, this is not to say that the senator from Chittenden North crossed this line, but we do have a rule here that we don't invoke others' motivations. So I would just ask, as this debate progresses, we hold to that idea. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to change the subject slightly to the write-in candidate section. Over the years, maybe too many of them, I've seen cases where candidates for office die within 10 days of an election. I've seen cases where somebody is shackled and kicked in the groin by a candidate for sheriff that might happen within after 10 days before sooner than 10 days after the election. I'm really concerned. I understand, you know, Mickey Mouse might have gotten quite a few votes, second votes in my last race, and I understand the frustration about that. We always see a number of people who weren't running for the office or governors voted for in various elections. So I understand the need for that, but I wonder if I could require the reporter.
The senator from Madison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, did the committee take into consideration those unusual circumstances that come up every now and then, and you would have no write-in candidate who had filed 10 days before the election?
I believe in the circumstance, and if you'd like, I can check with our legislative counsel. But I believe in the circumstances, if a candidate were to die just within that 10-day window prior to a primary or a general election, that the party would be able to replace that candidate with a party nominee, and then that would probably allow them to be a write-in candidate. But again, I can get that information to you either before third reading, if you would like.
Before third reading would be fine, Mr. President, but I am concerned about those cases where And we've seen them all too often where a candidate for office has been charged with a crime or has done something. And this would, even though it's difficult for a write-in to beat a candidate whose name is on the ballot, this would not allow that. Am I correct?
So if, in the circumstance where a candidate, something has come up with a candidate within the 10 days, yeah, I think that it is very hard for a write-in candidate to win in these state and federal and even county races. We saw that unfortunately just last year. So especially without more than 10 days notice, it's unlikely that, especially in those types of races, that a write-in candidate would be able to win the sufficient number of votes to beat a candidate that is on the ballot. Particularly with early voting, it's important to understand that with early voting, many people have already voted prior to the 10 days. So if a candidate who wants to really run a robust write-in campaign, they're going to have to know 45 to 60 days in advance to make sure that people even know they're doing a write-in campaign. So I'm not sure that even with this provision, a write-in candidate would be able to prevail.
I appreciate the response, Mr. President. I still would just share that concern that we are not allowing something to happen. But I thank the reporter for the response. It's helpful to understand where the committee is coming from.
Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter?
Senator from Madison is interrogated as a reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, I'm wondering whether there could come a time when a candidate wins a primary contest and still could be denied access to the general election ballot.
I'm thinking this through. I don't believe so. If they win a primary, if a candidate wins a primary, then they would be able to stay on that ballot as a primary, as that party's nominee. The provision in the bill is just about candidates who would lose a primary. But if someone wins a primary, they would be that party's nominee for the general election and would be on the general election ballot. And as the senator from Bennington just pointed out, that happens even if a candidate were to die, because the ballots are printed far in advance of the general election date, so their name would still be on the ballot. Or if a candidate were to run into some legal challenges, they would also be on the ballot because they are printed in advance, and nothing prevents you from running for office even if you have legal challenges.
I thank the reporter. I just want to move to another section of the bill, if I could, the electronic voting provision. Mr. President, who did you have come testify on that section of the bill? I'm especially interested in whether there were any opposing views or whether the testimony was pretty much from people who supported this, maybe even the cybersecurity experts from the company that you referenced in your report.
Thank you for that question, Mr. President. We heard from a number of people on this, both supporters and opponents. We heard from an advocate who is the senior advisor on election security for Free Speech for People, and she came and testified in person and was against this provision. We got written testimony from a number of cybersecurity people who, some were for, some were against. We had some other, we had a member of the press who testified against this. But we heard strong testimony in support of this. We did hear from the company that operates the secure portal that we're talking about, which is called Democracy Live. We heard, of course, from our Secretary of State's office, which is who are very in favor of this. And we heard from, as I mentioned, members of the military and members of the disability community who are in favor of this. So we did hear from both sides of this issue.
I thank the reporter. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I inquire of the reporter?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just need clarification, kind of following up on what the senior senator from Bennington mentioned. If it's 10 days prior to an election and we were to find out something horrible about somebody on the ballot, God forbid, something is revealed to the public, and could the public then put forward a write-in candidate that would allow that write-in candidate basically to win the race, given the horrific situation that was revealed about a candidate on the ballot? Or are people still limited to just choosing one of the two or three?
So I think it's, first of all, nobody wants that horrible situation to happen.
Oh, I'm just wondering.
But obviously, it could, and in
sure,
some cases
sure.
has.
Yeah.
Because we have a significant early voting window, many people will have already cast their ballots prior to the 10-day window. And they will have, potentially written somebody in, they will have potentially voted for, probably voted for one of the candidates whose name appears on the ballot. If something were to be revealed within that 10-day window or after the 10 days, it would, if somebody hasn't already told the clerk that they would like to be a write-in candidate, they wouldn't have their individual votes counted. But I think, Mr. President, that at that point, because we have so much early voting, so many people would have voted already, and it would be beyond the time when a viable write-in candidate would have the ability to win. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that well,
You are, I appreciate this. So is it 10 days that you have to declare before to be a write-in, or how many days is it prior?
It's the second Friday prior. So as you know, the election day is on a Tuesday. So it's not the immediate prior Friday, but the Friday before that. So I'm rounding to 10 days. So I think maybe it's technically 11. But so they would have to tell their clerk, I want to be an official write-in candidate. The Secretary of State's office would develop a form that could be used for this. And then the clerks would then know that this is a candidate whose name they should count. And I just want to be clear, just because even if a candidate hasn't declared that they want to be a write-in candidate, somebody can still be a write-in candidate. People can still write in candidates. It's just that the clerks would not have to count each one-off candidate. 2 votes for Mickey Mouse, 2 votes for Donald Duck kind of scenario. But if there was a serious write-in candidate, they would have to declare 10 days prior in order to get their votes counted.
But it would definitely have to happen within before that 10 days.
Correct.
Okay.
As it's currently written, yes.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to take us to the positive side of the write-in discussion, because what we're looking at are statewide, county, and federal candidates. We are electing people for 6 years, 4 years, and a few 2-year races. These are important offices. If a person is not clear on wanting to serve in those capacities 10 days ahead of time, I'm sorry, we're electing some of people who represent the largest number of us, and in many serious situations, our prosecutors, our probate judges, our senators. I would hope that we could support this change in law so that for our longest terms that we elect in this state and from our most important jobs, that we would at least have thoughtful consideration about whether they want to run or not. And that, coupled with early voting, is a reason to support this 10-day change. As we know, nothing is forever in this state. And if it isn't working, and if there are too many challenges, and if we have too many egregious things that happen in those 10 days, we can change it. But right now, I would want to have you really think about those offices that we're electing in this. This is, remember, it's not for municipals, it's not for us. This is statewide, county, and federal. So it's our senators, our prosecutors, and our and the rest of that crowd. I would love to also just address the competing goods with electronic balloting. We're talking about less than 1,000 Vermonters who are serving in the Peace Corps, who are serving in submarines, who are serving all over the world, who are representing us, and we are so proud of them. We are constantly balancing competing goods in this body. We're competing access to voting with security of voting. We are assured by one of the best elections people in the country, our own director of elections, that this is as secure as it gets. I have absolute confidence in our Secretary of State's office, and I will be supporting this. It's new, and I think we all need to get comfortable in some ways with this, but we are looking at less than that we have really worked to hone this so that we can get as many of you supporting this as possible. This is less than 1,000 people. This is for our overseas people who we want to be weighing in on our elections. So competing goods, yes, but I would hope you would support this measure. Thank you.
Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I realize I'm standing for the second time, but I did reread the bill in the intervening time, and I'd again like to interrogate the reporter if I could.
The senator from Madison is interrogated.
And the question I still had was regarding primaries and then the general ballot. So is this not true? If a candidate filed as a Republican candidate for any particular office, but lost in that primary, but won in the same contest, a write-in, does that not mean that that person could not be on the ballot? If I'm reading the language correctly, I think that's true.
I'm thinking this through, and so are you saying, so for example, if someone were to run in the Republican primary,
And
but
lose.
then and lose that primary, but get enough write-in votes in the Democratic primary, would they be able to move forward in the general election as the Democratic, as the Democratic nominee? Is that the question?
Well, Mr. President, I think based on what I'm reading in the statute, proposed law change, once they lose in a primary, if they file in that particular primary, they cannot appear on the ballot in the general election.
Yes, I'm not sure about the write-in provision. You can't be a candidate under current law. You can only be a candidate in one primary. You can't run in two primaries as a candidate right now. So if you are running as a Republican in the Republican primary and were to lose that primary, then you couldn't then move forward being the candidate in another party's general election or as an independent candidate under this provision, even as a write-in candidate. I believe that's correct, yes. Just thinking it through.
I thank the reporter.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington, my apologies. I had not seen you before calling on someone to speak a second time.
I think that last question is important because I had a seatmate who regularly ran as both a Democrat and Republican. He ran as a Republican, but got enough write-in votes to also be the Democratic nominee. And it was not rare, at least not too long ago, to have that happen in a variety of, or if there's no candidate in one party and you get write-ins for somebody else who's popular in a broad range. But that wasn't why I stood up. I have a question. May I interrogate the proposer?
The senator from Madison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Having had the joy of counting Mickey Mouse to the point where I asked how many votes he had to get before he was the town, on the town board of listers, or I think it was Water Commission. But, and you say, if I intend to run, I have to let the clerk know, because the clerk really doesn't need to sit there and count all the Mickey Mouse votes. But and so I have to tell the clerk I'm going to run, so the clerk knows she needs to count my votes. But is there anything that says in that extraordinary incident, like somebody got convicted of sexual assault but not rape, or found out that their entire resume was faked, is there anything that says that the clerk can't count those votes? So that in those extraordinary circumstances, you know, somebody is caught on film doing something very violent and unacceptable. Is there anything that says the clerk can't count the votes if I come out 9 days before the election, because this thing got revealed on day 10, I come out and say, I'm going to run, this candidate is no good. Is there anything that says the clerk can't count those votes?
Thank you, Mr. President. That is a great question. I'm just looking at the language. I don't believe there is, but Mr. President, could I take a brief recess to check with our council on that question and also the question from the senator from Rutland?
We'll declare a brief recess.
Thank you.
Senate will please come to order. And at the moment, the senator from Washington was interrogating the senator from Addison, I believe. Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for that question, Senator. In the recess, I conferred with our legal counsel and the director of elections, and this provision would prevent a clerk from saying, oh, I'm going to decide to count this candidate's. All write-in candidates would have to be treated the same. Either you file and get counted, or you don't file and only are counted in the aggregate. So it would be an aggregate number of write-in votes. Again, I just want to reiterate a point that I made earlier, which is that even if something heinous were to happen within the 10-day window, because of early voting, it is very unlikely that a write-in candidate who hasn't really trying to actively be a candidate would be able to gather enough votes within that 10-day voting window, even if something really awful happened, because so many people in our state vote early. So it's an unlikely scenario, but that's what this would be. And if we made it so that a clerk could decide which votes to count, that would be a little fishy. So it really needs to be if you don't follow the what would be the law, you wouldn't get your votes counted. It's not a clerk's discretion.
That brings up another question. If that happens, and we had an incident in this body where we had a member accused of some pretty heinous things, do we have any method of recall, or is there any recourse to the voters, or is that person who did something heinous the representative of the people until the next election?
We do not have a recall provision in Vermont. And the method for removing a person from office is impeachment. And that is what we're seeing, unfortunately, right now in the other body, because there are elected officials who are in office and won't resign. In order to remove them from office, they need to be impeached, and that would be impeached and convicted by the Senate. And that would be the same for a member of the General Assembly or a statewide constitutional officer. So there's not a recall provision, there's only impeachment.
Okay, but there is a way to rectify an election that the majority of the voters, if they'd known when they voted, they wouldn't have voted the way they did. There is a way to rectify that situation.
That's, I think, what the General Assembly is exploring at right now, in fact. Yes, the impeachment process is the ultimate process, or a candidate resigning if they understand that if they themselves decide to take themselves out of office, and then there's a provision for the governor to appoint a replacement.
Thank you.
Senator from Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Oh, I've got several questions to ask. Let's start with what we were talking about a few moments ago, Mr. President, and that's the issue of people running for multiple offices at the same time. Let me talk about a scenario for a second, and perhaps you can explain how this would work under this bill. Two individuals appear on the Democratic ballot for a countywide office at the same time. One of them loses, but during the course of the race, the person who loses gets enough votes to be listed as the Republican candidate for the same race. And then a general election is held with those two candidates. Is that permissible in this situation?
So yes, Mr. President, I believe this is the same question that the senator from Rutland asked. And in the break, in the recess, I asked our director of elections and our legal counsel that question, and I had answered it incorrectly. So thank you for answering that question again. So I have the chance to correct the record because I was wrong with my answer last time. So if a candidate runs as on the Republican ballot in the Republican primary and loses that primary, but is a write-in candidate in the Democratic primary or the Progressive primary, either one, and gets enough write-in votes to win that primary, they could advance as that party's nomination, even though they lost the Republican nomination. So thank you for asking that, and my apologies to the senator from Rutland for answering that question incorrectly. So yes, in that scenario, they will have won a primary election through the write-in. It's probably not entirely likely scenario, or not a very scenario that would happen a lot, but it would be legally permissible even under this new provision.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Although it wouldn't happen a lot, it happened 4 years ago in Franklin County with our race for probate judge.
Oh, well, there you
So
go.
it can happen. The next question I have relates to cybersecurity. As part of the people who testified on the cybersecurity issue, did you hear from the Director of Information Security from the Agency of Digital Services?
Not on this provision. We did not hear from him in this. We heard from him on another bill, though.
Well, this is the agency that is responsible for cybersecurity and issues such as data transmission and the security of them in state government.
Yes, so the Secretary of State's office works closely with the Agency of Digital Services on a regular basis for administering their entire elections electronic system. So I think that they consult, and I think I mentioned this in my report, but there is a report that's required in this. After the 2024 election cycle, there would be a report back from the Secretary of State's office and the Agency of Digital Services about the electronic ballot return and how that worked during the 2024 election, if there were any problems with it, and if there were any recommendations moving forward about the use of it. So the Agency of Digital Services would be in the loop, and they are currently in the loop, and also the Secretary of State's office works closely with federal partners to make sure that our election systems are secure to the best of their ability.
But just so that I understand it, the person in Vermont state government who is in charge of cybersecurity did not testify on the bill to the committee.
Correct.
Thank you. In terms of the handling of the electronic record, the process of how the electronic records move back and forth, do any of them touch the towns at all, or is it directly with the Secretary of State?
So thank you for that question, Mr. President. So the process would be if a voter, they receive their ballot electronically, they could to just be clear, they could still continue to return it by mail. So they would still have that option. They could print it and return it themselves. But for those limited voters that would be allowed to return it electronically, they would submit it back electronically, and it would be through essentially a PDF running through a secure portal. And similar to what I think many of us have used, sort of DocuSign, where we sign a document online and it's in a secure portal, and that happens for many legal transactions at this point. And we have expanded that during the pandemic. So after that ballot is then sent electronically back, it goes through the portal to the clerk's office. The clerk would get a notification when but when they log into the portal, and they would say, oh, there's an electronic ballot that's been returned to me. And so then the clerk would print that ballot off, and it's printed on a printer that would print it on a piece of paper that is the same exact paper that is used for regular ballots, for mail-in ballots and for in-person ballots. So it would be indistinguishable between the other ballots. And then the clerk would take that ballot to another person, and another person would file that ballot, either putting it in the tabulator or putting it in an envelope and waiting for it to be tabulated along with all the other ballots. So there would be a paper record of that ballot, just like there would be in a mail-in ballot, and only the clerk's office would see that ballot and see that it's come in, not the Secretary of State's office. It would go directly to the town clerk.
Okay. Do people in town clerk's offices still share passwords?
I can't speak for everyone in every town clerk's office, but I can assure you that our town clerks are extremely careful with the security and the confidentiality of our election system. They are very well-trained individuals who understand the importance of their job, and I have deep respect, and our committee has deep respect for the clerks, and the Clerks Association supports this provision and believes that the administration of this provision is feasible for them and that they would be able to maintain the security of those ballots once they are sent and returned to the clerk's offices.
Do folks who work in town clerk's offices receive training in cybersecurity?
The Clerks Association, clerks' offices receives extensive training from the Secretary of State's office, and that would include issues related to cybersecurity and how to maintain the security of ballots that are electronically delivered and now would be, under this provision, electronically returned. So yes, I believe that is part of their training.
And not sharing passwords would be included in that, presumably?
I would hope so, that is a sort of basic of cybersecurity is to not share passwords. So I would hope that that would be part of the training, but I can't speak to that specifically.
It's been a number of years, Mr. President, and I would add, I've looked at this issue, but I know the last time I looked at the issue, there was a problem about shared passwords and really data security generally as a result of that. It may have been solved now at this point, certainly, we hope so. Let me turn to another question regarding the bill. The bill indicates data collection about information such as race and gender and age, information that would be retained as confidential within the system. What's the purpose of that request?
Like we see in many areas that we have been working on over the last several years, including the criminal justice system, the healthcare system, correction system, many different areas of policy that we've been working on in this chamber. We have added provisions to many of those about data collection based on race, gender, and sexuality and gender identity in order to be able to be assured that we have data that can understand how different systems, and in this case the election system, impact members of different demographic groups. So this is really to be able to understand, you know, our candidates of color running in the same rates as the numbers of Vermonters of color, and those types of, and are there issues that we need to address in our electoral system for different members of different demographic groups. So it's really similar to other areas where we've been tracking demographic data. It is a way of tracking progress and problems with access to candidacy for different members of our community here in Vermont.
My understanding, Mr. President, is that any information reported would not be reported individually to the people on the ballot, but would be reported in aggregate form. Is that correct?
Correct. So it's not about any one individual candidate and whether that candidate is successful. It's about the aggregate data of people who are running for office and how that changes over time. Are we seeing more women running? Are we seeing what are the demographics of people changing over time who are running as candidates? And again, I want to emphasize that the submission of the data from a candidate is optional. They don't have to choose to answer. They can always just leave it blank, and that would not impact their ability to get onto the ballot. And the same goes for the local elections. The information on an individual candidate basis would be kept confidential. It would just be released in aggregate form for data purposes.
As we talk, Mr. President, about aggregate form, I assume for the data to be of any value, you have to look at the race or type of race for which the candidate is running. And generally speaking, once you have a certain number of people in that race, then it is not so specific as to identify a particular candidate. Am I correct in that logic?
Yeah, I think it wouldn't be so specific as to identify a specific candidate, but maybe all of the candidates who are running for state legislature or all of the candidates who are running for statewide races, or all of the candidates statewide who are running for town select board. Again, it would be optional, and it wouldn't be personally identifiable. However, we all know that once you run for office, you're running in a public race, and many candidates, use their identity as part of their campaign. Whether it's, I certainly, when I ran as a woman, as a mom, and was proud to have people understand my sort of demographic category. So I think that most people understand that once they put themselves out there to run for public office, much of the information about who they are becomes public. But this is really just to protect from, the confidentiality piece is to protect from a sort of bad actor requesting information as a means for targeting individual candidates or individual groups of candidates.
I'm sure we've seen, and we certainly see it in real estate, for example, many marginalized groups don't put down their racial identity because of fears of discrimination associated with that. Is that a possibility here? For example, if you have a group, and depending upon how far down you bring the aggregate to, let's say a 3-member race for the Senate, in which you have perhaps 15 or 20 people who are potential candidates, you're over that usually minimum of 10 for which reporting is not a problem. If you had a situation such as that, in which all of the white candidates filled out the blank and identified their race, and the BIPOC candidates left it blank, you would have kind of a distorted number. Is that something that you've discussed, that potential?
Well, the data wouldn't be released on that small of a, wouldn't be released on a race by race basis, meaning the, political race by political race basis. It would be released on the aggregate. So the Secretary of State's office may issue a demographic report for the previous election. It wouldn't be something that would be necessarily released as part of that race for Senate.
So it might be for all Senate races?
All Senate races,
how many
or even all
black
statewide
candidates have run for the Senate in Vermont in the last election?
That is information that I don't know, Mr. President. And one of the benefits of collecting this data is that that's information we might know with the collection of this data.
Correct, Mr. President, and I agree that we might know it, but then again, depending upon the individual, we might not know it, and we might receive information that statistically is meaningless. And that's my concern more than anything else. Thank you, Mr. President. I believe I've asked the questions that I'm concerned.
Senator from Lamoille.
Mr. President, I am one of those people that has both parties' nominations. I ran as a Republican. I won the Republican nomination. But at the same time, in this last election, I got quite a significant number of write-in votes on the Democratic side. And I have a lot of friends on both sides. It gives me pause to think that my friends that are Democrats that voted for me, that, and I took the Democratic nomination partly out of respect for those people that voted for me in the Democratic primary. And this feels to me like you're taking something away from them as well as an option away from me. And I wanted to be respectful of my friends on the Democratic side that wrote me in, and I took the nomination. So I stand here as someone that got both parties' nomination, and this does feel uncomfortable for me to do that. My second feeling about this bill goes back, and I totally understand that this is countywide races, the legislature, and statewide officials that you're doing it. This goes back maybe 20 years, I was serving in the other body, and there was a member of the committee I was on in the other body. That person was mayor of the city of Barre. That person decided after a very long time that they were not going to run for mayor of the city of Barre again. The election was town meeting week. The legislature was breaking, we all went off. This individual went to the Caribbean thinking, I'm not running for re-election as mayor. And there was at least one city council member in Barre running for mayor. He found out the day after town meeting, he had been re-elected as mayor of the city of Barre with a significant number of votes, more than hundreds and won that race as mayor and came back and proudly served as the mayor of the city of Barre for the next term, and was a friend of mine and did a very good job. This feels like, to me, we're taking something away from the voters in an instance like that. And this happened to be a local election and a mayor, but Barre's a fairly significant sized community, and we do have counties that have less population than the city of Barre. And so it gives me pause to feel like I'm taking something away and a choice away from voters that in the write-in situation here. So these are two situations that make me look at this and I have great pause about this.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also, as my colleague from Lamoille pointed out, won the Democratic nomination and won the Republican nomination, and I was told I won the progressive, I had more votes than anybody for the progressive nominations, but yet I don't think the party was formed in my district, so I couldn't accept that as well, but I would have proudly have accepted it. I feel as well that in today's age, when we are doing everything we can do to get people to go to the polls and vote, but yet we still see elections time and time again that have less than 20% of turnout, I just feel that this isn't the time when we holler from the rooftops that every voice counts, every vote counts. Anything that goes along with voting is to be respected and honored, and we're doing everything we can do to increase turnouts. Anything that could look like we are discouraging people from running or voting and going to vote for the candidate that they wish to have elected, even if it is Donald Duck, should not be what we are trying to do. I would not support any part of this. Thank you.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to rise in support of this bill and clarify 2 points that we heard in committee. The scenario that we heard played out with a local election for a write-in candidate, this bill does not respond to write-in candidates on a local level. At least in Hartford, we also don't run candidates for local election by party. We don't have a D or an R, at least when I ran for select board, that wasn't a part of our local elections. And while I'm not familiar with how other communities are running their elections, my understanding is local elections typically do not have a party candidate associated race. So I'm not quite sure on the scenario there, but I don't believe what we've heard on the floor today would actually be addressed under changes in this bill. I also want to highlight some of the back and forth we've had around the administration of our elections. And I stand here today in firm support of what we heard from our Town Clerks Association. As it's been said before, our town clerks are the bedrock of administering our elections. And the write-in candidate provisions that we currently have in law are a sticking point for them when, after hours and hours of standing out collecting votes, they have to count minuscule numbers of fake names, joke names, or candidates who, for fun, wanted to write themselves as justices of the peace. That level of administrative task and effort is hours of time that our town clerks could be more efficiently spending on the real work of getting properly elected folks in the right process. So I stand in firm support of the bill that we have in front of us. I also wanted to comment on one further thing, which is the conversation around fusion candidates. We did not, you might be referring to previous iterations of the bill when you're thinking about fusion candidates, if that's something folks in the room are aware of. This bill does not take instance in the way we saw previous iterations look at fusion candidates. And if you, as the chair of the committee noted previously, were to win the Democratic primary, win the Republican primary, and then happen to win the Progressive primary, you certainly can have that. It's not changed under the bill as it stands. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's not our job to pass laws to accommodate the partisan interests of any party. And so I'm trying to avoid using proper nouns. Let us say we have three major parties, two of which, in terms of numbers, are more major than the other party, which makes that other party, the smaller party, have a different role in elections. If that smaller party bears as close a resemblance to one of the larger parties than to the other, that smaller party operating independently can function as a spoiler by dividing the votes that otherwise would have gone. If it was just one of those parties that resemble one another or the other, there's a certain number of votes. X divided by 2 yields smaller numbers. And so it makes sense that the larger party would court the smaller party and say, don't divide our ranks. Don't be a spoiler, work with us. And if the smaller party responds positively to that, from the point of view, at least, of those two parties, it's a better thing. If a candidate of the smaller party identifies with that smaller party, he or she may nevertheless decide, I'm going to run on this other party. And hopefully, and now you can't run in 2 primaries. But you might hope to be written in on the party you're actually closer to, the smaller party. So you win in the big party, and hopefully you get nominated by your own party as well on a write-in. And that can work. The problem is if you're waiting for a write-in, you can't run in both, then what happens is that your smaller party is a sitting duck. Because there are people out there who no one really seriously want to nominate. People who are sloppy with their accusations, people who are intemperate in their language. And there's a small party primary that maybe some maverick, and I'm being polite, can become the nominee. The scenario is dangerous for that smaller party and is a disincentive to a candidate of that party running in the larger party. Now, again, if the candidate from the small party wins the primary of the larger party, then that candidate can, of course, then accept the nomination of the smaller party. But there is, in my view, a scenario in which the candidate from the small party refrains from running in the primary of the small party, runs in the primary of the large party, wins a write-in for the small party, loses the big party, and cannot accept the nomination of that small party, that candidate has won on a write-in vote, and leaves that nomination to the, being polite, the maverick. And I think that is a disincentive then for unity. Now, if I were a member of the other large party, I'd say, good, let them fight it out. But I worry about people who have shared interests not being able to run and work cooperatively. And so actually, I'm not sure if this is the time to ask. It's just a point of inquiry, of process. Can the vote on this bill be made divisible?
To slightly rephrase the question, is the report divisible? It's not yet a bill, but yes, it is divisible.
Is this the time to move that?
It is one of the times. It is not necessarily the time. That is up to you.
I'll wait until this discussion is complete rather than interrupt it.
Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to clarify some things that we've just heard and also respond to a couple. Just to reiterate the remarks of the junior senator from Windsor. This bill does not prevent somebody from being what's commonly known as a fusion candidate. So the senator from Lamoille and the scenario that he presented about winning the nomination of multiple parties, one as a candidate on the ballot and the other as a write-in candidate, it is not prevented in this bill. That is absolutely possible. You can be any number. You could have all three letters after your name if you win the nomination of all three of them. So that is not prevented by this bill or by the provision in this bill at all. There, as junior senator from Windsor said, there was a provision in the other body that was removed from the bill, that was never in the Senate version of the bill. So fusion candidates are absolutely still permitted and in this bill, even with this provision. And then the senior senator from Windsor just had a scenario that I believe I spoke to with the senator from Rutland, and then later the senator from Franklin asked this question, and we took a recess so I could get my record straight. If you lose if you're a candidate for one party and you lose the nomination of the primary of that party, but you're written in and win the nomination of the other, you can run as the candidate for the party where you have won. So you would absolutely be able to move forward if, as the scenario that the senior senator of Windsor was using, if you lose the large party's nomination, but then are written in for the small party, you can be the nominee and move forward to the general election under the small party. I'm trying to use the same words that the senator used, but so and that was the same question that the senator from Rutland and the senator from Franklin had, and I just want to make sure that everyone understood that, because I did answer it incorrectly the first time and then corrected the record. It is possible to lose in one party's nomination, get a write-in in the other, and move forward with that party's with the other party's nomination. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also appreciate the neutral language from the senior senator from Windsor. And I would like to interrogate the reporter, if I may.
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
If I heard you correctly, a person who lost a major party ballot but won a write-in for a small party ballot could run on the general ballot.
That is correct.
That runs contrary to what I see on page 3248, directly under sore loser law. It says, C, in no event shall a candidate who loses a major party primary be nominated to appear on the general election ballot pursuant to this subchapter by a committee of any party other than the party for which the candidate appeared on the primary ballot. So I am a bit confused, but perhaps I would ask that you clarify, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. If they're happening simultaneously and there is a write-in candidate for one party and name on the ballot in the other party, and you lose the name on the ballot in one party but win the write-in on the other, then you would win that party's nomination. At the same time, you've lost the other one, so you could move forward with winning the other party's nomination. And that was the answer that I got during the recess from our legal counsel and our director of elections.
I believe I heard earlier from the reporter of the bill that the independent filing deadline is after the primary. And that is contrary to the knowledge that I possess before I heard that. So would you be willing to clarify, please?
The filing deadlines are not changed in this bill, and the independent filing deadline is after the primary election in late August, I believe. I can get that answer to you for third reading, or if you would like me to take a recess on the exact date of when that is. But I myself have had experience with that.
Is the chair asking for a brief recess?
I'm sorry, I'm getting multiple. Yes, I guess I am asking for a brief recess. I'm getting multiple signals here, so I want to make sure I'm answering the question correctly. So I would like a recess.
We'll take a brief recess. The Senate will please return to order or come to order. Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. That took a little time because we strangely don't have the Title 17 book on the floor, and the internet was not working fast enough for us to get the question, or the answer to the question, so apologies for the delay. But the answer to the two questions are the filing deadlines, as I said before, are not being changed in this bill, and the filing deadline for independent candidates is the Thursday before the primary election in August. So I had said that it was after. I'm sorry, I was wrong about that. I have not memorized all of Title 17, but I'm doing my best. So it's the Thursday before the primary election. That does not change in this for independent candidates to file. The other question that I just want to clarify yet again is that this provision does not prevent somebody from getting the nomination as a write-in candidate and then moving forward with that nomination for whatever party they win the write-in candidacy for if they have lost being on the ballot for another party. Under current law, candidates can't run in two primaries. They have to pick a lane or pick a party and run in that party's primary, but they can still get a nomination of another party through a write-in and then be a fusion candidate, or if they lose the one for which they're on the ballot, they can be the nomination for the one that they have won on the write-in. What this provision would prevent is somebody losing altogether, not getting a write-in one on the ballot, and then having a party nominate them for them. So if there's one party that doesn't have a nominee, they couldn't nominate somebody who was lost in another party's primary to be their nominee in that party. And they couldn't then run, or they couldn't run as an independent candidate. And partly that's because the filing deadline has passed, but they couldn't then just decide to be an independent candidate either. So hopefully that clarifies and does not further confuse the issue.
You have the floor, Senator. I believe you were interrogating the senator, so.
One of the supporters of the bill mentioned that this new law would apply to important big elections like the county office and the state office and the federal office, and I appreciate that. But I also noticed that on page 3251, it mentions the General Assembly. I happen to live in a town where I, as a lowly local official, had 22,000 constituents, and yet my House rep has about 4,000 and something. So I think to make that distinction, to me feels a little bit odd. But it is true, is it not, that the General Assembly races are also included with these big county, state, and federal elections in this bill?
There are multiple provisions of this bill, so I just want to understand which specific provision of this bill are you asking this question about?
Thank you, Mr. President. It's on page 3251, section 9, the second paragraph. It's about write-in candidates, section A1.
Section A1. There are various sections of law that apply to different types of candidates. So, but this, yes, any county office, any state office, or any federal office, this would apply to. And that would include the General Assembly seats. Yes, it would not, the offices it would not apply to are the municipal offices. And one of the reasons for that is that our county races, our state races, and our federal races happen at the same time. They have the same primary day and they have the same general election day. So the clerks are working simultaneously on all of these types of elections, all of these types of offices on the same election day. So it was important to both the clerks and the Secretary of States that it was either all of those or none of those, because if you just do, okay, just the state races and not the county races, they still will have to stay there all night and count all the Mickey Mouses for the county races, even if they don't have to do it for the state or the federal races. So dividing up those three races those three types of races didn't make sense because their elections happen on the same time. Whereas the municipal elections happen, as you know, on town meeting day. So that would be when the write-in provision, the notification for write-ins would not apply. And for those of us who live in very small towns, most of our towns are really rural and really small, a write-in candidate could easily run a race and win for school board, select board, and all of the small local races we have more easily than running on the general or primary election for the larger races. And I know that there are some communities that are larger, especially in Chittenden County, so the numbers might not quite make as much sense there, but for the count, for all, this would include General Assembly races, county races, federal races, and statewide state races, but not the municipal elections.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, may I interrogate the proposer?
Senator from Addison is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
I thought I understood this, Mr. President, but I'm getting confused. We just said that if I ran as a Democrat, but I got in the primary, all right? And I also got enough votes in one of the other parties' primary, write-in votes, that I could be a fusion candidate, or I could, if I lost the Democrat, I could run on the other one. But we just said I have to declare myself as an independent candidate. Is the clerk gonna, if I get written in, do I have to declare that I'm also running as a write-in candidate, which is considered really bad form, to say I'm running for the other party too? Do I have to declare that I am a write-in candidate for all the other parties in order to get the votes counted?
Yes, I believe you would. If you were wanting to make sure that you got the nomination of the other party to be a fusion candidate, you would have to declare to be a write-in candidate for that party, and I am on the ballot for this party.
Then that is a major change, because I don't know of anyone that declares they want to be on the other party's primary, and to do so would probably cause you to lose all the elections. And I can see where that is a concern. And primaries are different than general elections. You don't usually get a whole lot of Mickey Mouse in primaries. They are party functions. Makes the angriest I've ever seen voters is when they wanted to vote for someone in the other party in a primary, and the voting machine would jam because they couldn't do it. They are party, not state functions, and I'm concerned that this really could limit some people's choice in an election.
Sorry, Senator, are you still okay, all set.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Senator from Wyndham.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's hard to think of a subject more important than elections that we cover. I mean, they're fundamental to our democracy, obviously, and voter confidence is critical. I want to return to the electronic ballot return section. I was skeptical of this, and much of my skepticism has been reduced, and I want to confirm, so I do want to interrogate the reporter. Did I get to that?
Senator from Addison is interrogated.
Thank you. I want to confirm that the process means that the ballot information is transmitted electronically, then the ballot is printed out, and the printed physical ballot is what connects to the tabulation system. I am seeing it as a air wall. barrier between the two electronic systems. So the two electronic systems never connect directly. Is that the case, Mr. President?
That is correct. The ballot would come in through the secure portal. It would be printed on a printer that is just connected to the clerk's computer, and then the printed ballot would be put in the tabulator. There is no connection between the tabulator and the electronic portal. It does not go directly from the portal to the tabulator. There's I love your analogy of the air wall in between. In fact, there's probably, they would walk it across the room to where the ballots are or the tabulators are. And it would be treated just like any other ballot that was received in the clerk's office, and the same procedures would take place after that ballot is printed.
Great. So there's no contact, and there would never likely be any contact.
Correct.
Thank you. And then another question, please. The definition of overseas voters on page 3253 indicates a person who is qualified to vote in Vermont and resides outside the United States, meaning the several states, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, and American Samoa, and military voters who by reason of active military duty are absent from the United States. And I want to clarify the meaning the several states, the District of Columbia, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Does that refer to persons qualified to vote in Vermont and residing outside the United States?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time on this definition because as I noted in my report, we narrowed the number of voters who would qualify for returning their ballots electronically compared to what where the House was. So we really wanted to have just overseas voters, but it turns out that figuring out what overseas is more complicated when you really start to think about it. So, we have Canada that is right next door, but under this definition would be considered overseas. And so where we sort of made the distinction was that if you have access to the U.S. Postal Service, ready access to the U.S. Postal Service, meaning that you're in one of the 50 states or the District of Columbia or any of the United States territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, and American Samoa, that would not be considered overseas. That would be considered domestic or stateside or United States. So that wouldn't be overseas. But Canada would be overseas. And the phrase "and military voters who by reason of military duty are absent from the United States" was an important addition that was suggested by the Secretary of State's office, because as you see, a person who is qualified to vote in Vermont and resides outside the United States, military voters may not consider themselves residents of where they are. They may be deployed to someplace, but they're not residing there. So so we had to include that line that by reason of active military duty are absent from the United States. So they're not necessarily residents of the submarine or the military base or wherever they might be, but they are in active military duty, and that's why they're not in Vermont to vote.
Okay, thank you. Mr. President, did you take any, did you hear from folks who do live in Puerto Rico or Guam who are Vermont voters? Because my understanding is the mail system is not as quick as it has been.
We did not hear from people who live in each of these places. This provision and this definition represented a very difficult compromise from the Senate Government Operations Committee. Therefore, we had to come up with a definition that fit the compromise of the committee. We had to define overseas voters. And even though there is a C between Vermont and Puerto Rico, it was still considered to be domestic because we had to make a definition. And Again, there would be a report back after the first election cycle where this was used, and we could determine whether there were issues with the way this was defined. But this was really an attempt to reach a middle ground on the number of voters who would have access to this provision.
I thank the reporter, and I would ask the president to let me know when it would be appropriate to make an amendment, because I do want this body to consider allowing Vermont voters who live, I would call it overseas, outside of the continent, to be able to access these privileges.
Give me one moment to confer with council.
Okay.
Senator from Wyndham, to answer your point of information, one could offer either an amendment to the report, or one could offer an amendment to the bill as amended, where the report to succeed in amending the bill. It would need to be in writing as per instructions from the secretary.
Okay, then I will not do it. Thank you.
The question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The nays appear to have it.
Division.
Division's been requested. Thank you. For those who are unfamiliar, when we call for...
It's whichever is preferable. It's the same thing, right?
I cannot make that decision for you. A division can start, and you could choose partway through the division to change to a roll, or you could...
roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Question is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Government Operations? Are you ready for the question? If so, the Secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
No.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Caldwell.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Jewett.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingle.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
No.
Senator McCormack.
Yes, with an explanation.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Perschlick.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
No.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Bihowski.
No.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
No.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 17. Those voting nay, 13. And you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Government Operations. For the explanation of vote, Senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just argued on the floor against this bill, and I told colleagues I would vote against it. I raised issues, and the reporter of the bill addressed my concerns. I thought I was offering rhetorical questions. She actually dealt with them as inquiries and gave me satisfactory answers.
The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The noes appear to have it.
Roll call.
Roll call's been requested. Senator from Windsor requested the roll. Secretary Johnson call.
Senator Baru.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
No.
Senator Campion.
No.
Senator Chittenden. Nay. Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Euling.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza.
No.
Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Pershling.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
No.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Bihowski.
No.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
No.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 16. Those voting nay, 14. And you have ordered third reading of H429. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Mr. President, I appreciated that debate. It was after the pandemic when we were all on Zoom and we didn't have spirited debate. I appreciate 2 hours of intense debate. That's what we were sent here to do, and I congratulate everyone. With that said, for various reasons, I will ask that we stand in adjournment until 1 p.m. By way of explanation, I will say that we are now in the stop and start mode, which I described yesterday. So we do have S100 and a couple of other bills, but I think it's best if we take a lunch break, come back at 1 o'clock, at which time we will begin the process of doing whatever has come over from the House, and we will move toward hopefully an evening adjournment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Now, is that pending announcements, did you say?
I did not make it pending announcements, but I will do so.
Now, the pending announcements, therefore, Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to announce that the Senate Government Operations Committee will meet at 12:45 so we can vote out our final charter bill. So grab some food and meet at 12:45 so we can do that when we meet again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to ask all members of the Senate Appropriations Committee to come to the committee room. Lunch is being served.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate stand adjourned until 1 p.m. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and the Senate will stand adjourned until 1 p.m.